Good evening, and welcome to another educational and stimulating episode of Slave Food Conversations. For those of you who are new to the Slave Food Project, we welcome you to another episode of Slave Food. We're two African American physicians, Dr. Columbus Batiste, an interventional cardiologist, and Dr. Eric Walsh, family medicine physician with a public health doctorate, explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discovered that eating a whole food, plant-based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. This episode is entitled The Diaspora of Disease. For this conversation, Dr. Walsh and Dr. Batiste connect with the brilliant international lifestyle specialist, Dr. Chidi. Dr. Chidi is a UK's Premier Lifestyle Doctor who uniquely has 4 degrees in science and medicine, trained in surgery, general practice, and lifestyle medicine at Cambridge and UCL and Johns Hopkins in the United States. He has worked with his clients to reverse, improve, and in some instances, prevent chronic illnesses, including heart disease, cancer, arthritis, and diabetes. He is a founding board member of the European Society of Lifestyle Medicine and a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He has over 20 years of experience as a national and international health speaker, where he aims to motivate, educate, entertain, and inspire people to health and wellness. To learn more about Dr. Chidi, please follow his Instagram at Dr. Chidi MD. The link to his website is in his Instagram bio. This conversation consists of 3 esteemed physicians, again, as they delve into the topic of the westernization of disease and how it has heavily impacted individuals of African American descent across the world. Welcome, doctors, and have a fantastic show.
Thank you.
Right.
Hello.
Thank you. Greetings. How are you?
Fantastic. Good to be with you. Slightly later on this side of the pond, but still good to be with you.
Where exactly in the UK are you?
So I'm just a little bit east of London. I'm in a beautiful place called Kent. Kent is considered to be the garden of Great Britain because we produce all the fruit and vegetables, so it's quite relevant to what we're doing today.
Awesome. Okay.
Wonderful. So before we kind of dive into things, I have a couple of simple questions. Tell me, how is the Queen doing during this pandemic? How's the Queen?
Well, I'm glad you asked about the Queen. She's doing very well. She's in her palace with her servants. I don't think anybody's got anything to worry about for the Queen. It's the rest of us that are struggling. But she's doing well. Yeah.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Yeah, that's one of the things we always kind of wonder about is, are things really the same across the pond over there for people of color when we go over? Is there still an issue of disparities? Is there still an issue of racism or of any of the strife that we experience here in America?
I think it's a really crucial question. I'm glad we got a bit of time to talk about it because, yes, of course, there are disparities. Yes, of course, there is racism. But I'm going to say it's on a slightly different level. And I would say historically it has been that way. I'm a guy who goes back and forth to the States all the time. And in Britain, there is racism, but it is not quite so in your face and so overt. I'll give you an example. There aren't areas in Great Britain where you have black areas, white areas, Hispanic, Chinese areas. We don't really have that. People are pretty much mixed together in terms of where they live and even in terms of their relationships, but there is still residual racism, and especially in the areas that we are probably going to be talking about in health. You even look as doctors, we're all physicians here. If you ever see a physician getting struck off, I'm sure it means the same thing in America as it means in Great Britain. Considering that maybe 25% of the doctors in Great Britain are black or Asian, pretty much 80 to 90% of the doctors that get struck off are black or Asian. Something's going on, right?
Now, what does it mean? You are going to have to explain struck off.
Okay. So their license revoked.
Right. Wow.
So nobody's going to tell me that it's only black and Asian doctors who make up misdemeanors so gross that they have to be struck off. I mean, but there is something different in the way that medical professionals, not just doctors, in fact, nurses, midwives have exactly the same issue. So we can see it underlying. It's not overt, but you can see it. So even though we mix together, and I think possibly get along a little bit easier in Great Britain, it's still there. It's still there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. So this has COVID really brought this out a bit more? I mean, has it really? I mean, here in the States, as you probably are very well aware, it's really displayed on full TV. Everyone can see it, the disparities that exist. There was a recent article that came out just this past week, and CDC report noting that people of African descent in America, their lives have been cut 3 years compared to Caucasians whose life has been cut 1 year over the course of 2020 from COVID. So substantial impact.
I mean, it's very interesting. In the early days, I was looking at the stats in America because you had a lot more granular statistics about deaths from COVID-19 from different states. And it was quite obvious that black people were dying at much higher rates than white people. And so that would also explain why life expectancy has gone down in such disparate ways. But yes, that is happening in England as well. I mean, most of the people in the early days who were suffering, especially from frontline workers, were black and Asian people. But look, everybody was scratching their head trying to figure out, well, what's going on? Is it racism? Is it poverty? Is it conspiracy? What's going on? But one of the things that people forgot to look at is, well, what about vitamin D levels, right? I mean, vitamin D levels, we know, I mean, in North America, Europe, anywhere in the West, in black people is much lower than in Caucasian people. And vitamin D has a huge influence on whether you get COVID-19 and how you develop COVID-19. And just for those people who are still skeptical of it, look, you can go to Nigeria, you can go to Ghana, you can go to Kenya. They are not, and they're all black, they are not dying at the same rates as they do if you're a black person in the West. It's different. And they're not richer than us. There is a big difference.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I know Eric and I, we've discussed this on a prior episode, really about the level of vitamin D. And so I'm thankful you're bringing it back up. And we've seen some of the research that really is looking at some of the cities, urban dwelling, and obviously the latitude and distance and just that absence of vitamin D and its benefit. And so it's interesting how folks are very skeptical about that. It's interesting.
Right from the beginning. I mean, I was privileged because I got to speak to the government think tank and the opposition think tank. So we have the Conservatives and the Labour Party, a bit like your Republicans and Democrats. I got to give evidence to both sides. Now, especially when I was giving evidence to the Labour side, this was back in April of last year, because I was looking at the evidence, I presented it to them. Many of them wouldn't even believe the evidence about vitamin D. They said, no, that is too simplistic. There must be, the big reason must be about racism, the big must be about poverty or social and economic change. But sometimes the issue is simpler than we think, and that one was staring us in the face.
Well, I was going to jump in and just say the vitamin D thing is something I talked about initially. It's blown my mind, and just in looking at it, what I think a lot of people who are listening, they might find interesting is that on both arms of the immune system, vitamin D works to turn down the inflammatory response. Yeah. So in the specific immune system, in the more general side of the immune system, both sides of the immune system, T cell arm antibody arm, it turns it down. So what happens, of course, is many of us are low in vitamin D. And so, this also affects us in other ways. I mean, so coronavirus is showing us like an immediate way that it happens. But this means that this is one of the reasons we are in a pro-inflammatory state in general. So when you get a virus like coronavirus that works through inflammation, through the cytokine storm and on, it's going to pronounce these things. And of course, African Americans are going to be disproportionately hit. The truth of the matter in America is almost all Americans have low vitamin D. Yeah. And in large part of that is because we spend so much time indoors. And then a lot of the sources that people get vitamin D from are really dairy products, which are pro-inflammatory. So even when you do get vitamin D, a lot of times you're replacing it with something bad. I think it's unfortunate that the vitamin, I tell all my patients this, and I really think it's sad the government didn't come out early on and say, look, everybody should be taking 3,000 to 5,000 international units of vitamin D right from the get. This whole thing may have been a much smaller, but just to stir the pot, I wonder sometimes when we find these simple solutions, if they're too inexpensive. At least on this side of the pond, somebody wants to make money off of this thing.
Well, you're in the land of commerce. I mean, I love coming to America, but everything is monetized. I mean, your healthcare, your prisons. I just can't actually get my head around it. But yes, I think that is part of the problem. It is too simple. Not enough people can take what they need out of it to make their living. And you mentioned the big thing. The big thing is that we're not getting outside enough, right? I think sometimes as doctors we see the figures, we see the chemicals, we say, oh, well, this is good for you, that's not good for you. But sometimes it's telling us something bigger. Vitamin D is brilliant for us, but it's telling us that we need to get outside more. There are many things that we probably will never know in our lifetime, that being outside does good for us. I mean, we know that the sun hitting us can lower our blood pressure. We know about vitamin D and the immune system, but it's all telling us to spend less time inside and more time outside, especially if you're people of color. I mean, we really need to, and we're the ones who really don't want to go out, especially when it's cold. I don't know what the weather's like there.
It's freezing where I am.
Oh, it's beautiful where I'm at in California, right?
It's always beautiful in California. I shouldn't even ask that.
Not when the fires. Not when the fires start burning.
Come on! Don't jinx us! But one of the things though about sunlight and vitamin D, and you're so right. Both of you are so right. And this is something that really resonated with me probably about 5-6 years ago. I never was taught in training 15 years ago. Is just really the power of vitamin D in the sunlight, rather, to trigger the chemical reaction to actually release nitric oxide, dilate the vessels, and still. So we look at the mechanism of how we're strengthening those arteries, which is a pathway for COVID, that we're actually replenishing that and lowering blood pressure. It's powerful. It's powerful. And so that's where there's some historical dispute over, okay, we know the low levels. And as you said, Chidi, it's a marker of something. And that marker is perhaps our need to be more outdoors, just as our marker or cravings may be more of a marker of a deficiency that we're yearning for something, or whether it's sleep or whether or not it's hydration that we need in that particular instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about being outdoors, really being a part of the solution. It's so cold now, but even in the cold, if you wrap yourself up, you actually can get outside and get some sunlight, at least on your face. Take off your gloves and get some on your hands. I was just reading something showing that ultraviolet, I think it's the A rays, actually are bactericidal. And so this author was writing the importance of keeping your window, even though you have to keep your windows closed, you should at least keep the shades up, let the sunlight in. It actually decreases the bacterial burden, the actual microbiome of your house by getting rid of bad bacteria in the house. So imagine when you step outside, how good that is for you in terms of protecting you. And I know someone's going to ask, well, how much do I take? This type of stuff. What's interesting is I read another article where they were looking at people in Kenya and in another part of Africa, and their vitamin D levels were over 100. In the States, normal starts at like 30. I don't remember the units. Over 100 level is what you draw. In fact, when women get to like 110 or 120, they no longer need to supplement their breast milk with vitamin D because their body at that point has such a reserve, the body feels safe giving it to the child in breast milk. So imagine, so when people say, well, get your vitamin D levels tested so you know how much to get, the truth of the matter is we tell people to have lower levels than our brothers and sisters in Africa have without even thinking about it.
That's absolutely right. And, I get the privilege to go around the world and talk about this. And I go to certain places. I was in a certain Scandinavian place and I was talking about the levels of vitamin D that we really need, because up there, they're not getting enough either. And sometimes that freaks people out. You were saying 5,000 units. Surely that's too much, because obviously most doctors are prescribing maybe up to 1,000, up to 2,000, because it's just about bone health.
Yeah,
they're not talking about the totality of our health, and the immune system, and what's been going on with COVID-19 has really laid that out to bear. And we need. I mean, I've been taking 10,000 for the last 10 years plus every day. And I'm okay, right? I'm my mother, who's 83 years old. I mean, she had a touch of COVID well over a year ago, but her vitamin D levels are so high. I mean, she was fine. There was no issue at all.
That's wonderful. That's huge. That's huge. So, changing gears slightly, but on the same topic, you've been really talking about Black life and Black lifestyles, matter. And so tell us a bit more about that, especially once again, kind of as it pertains to outside this country. And as you mentioned, you travel to Africa, you're there in London and England, outside London. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it was really coming out of this, the Black Lives Matter movement. And because I spent a lot of time talking about lifestyle, I said, well, what's the Black lifestyle? Does that matter? And obviously it does. We've been talking about a big part of it, vitamin D. For many of the illnesses that we suffer worse than our Caucasian brothers and sisters, vitamin D almost always has a factor to play. So for me, I don't have shares in vitamin D. Maybe I should, or start producing it myself. But the big push for Black people is to, first of all, get outside. It, as you said, Dr. Walsh, I mean, it doesn't matter what the weather is. We have to force ourselves outside. I go to Sweden. The Swedes have a very interesting thing to say about clothing. They say, look, there's no terrible weather. There's only terrible clothing. And what I notice about them is that it doesn't matter how small the children are. It doesn't matter how cold the weather is. They are spending hours outside every single day. They've got the right clothes on. They're fine. The kids are fine. They're playing around. But for many of us, we tend to shy away. We tend to say, well, the sun's not out today. I don't think I can go outside. It's blowing a bit. I can't go outside. Many of us, if we're prescribing exercise as part of the regime for our treatments, well, I couldn't go out today because it was raining. I couldn't go out because it was windy. People need to get into the habit of just being outside, especially people of color. Talking about our diets and often our need for these high fat, high sugar foods that we tend to do more than the average. It's about changing your lifestyle so you can have a total holistic look on health that, I'm not so keen for people just to say, well, look, this is going to help with your heart disease. This is going to help with your cancer. Whatever you take should help with everything. The good food, the greens, the berries, the nuts, the water, whatever you take should help with absolutely every part of your health, not just one specific part. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about holistic medicine.
Yeah, no, that's huge.
And one of the people we quote a lot is Dr. Michael Greger. That's one of the things he says a lot. He says, what's good for this is it's good for this. It's good for this. It's good for this. So this lifestyle is Bible-based lifestyle. Even really is good for everything. I think That's a powerful way to say it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
The one thing when we've spent time together out here in California when you came out for a conference and I followed you, but in preparation for today, I said, let me go and take a listen to some of your lecture and see it. And whoa, I loved it. I may have to embody my Chidi, get my chi on when I'm doing it. But But one of the things that I think is very specific, is even to the concept of this project, is you brought out something where you said that we were slaves to, why do you say slaves for sugar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were, once we were slaves in order to kind of raise sugar, to grow it and so forth. And now we're slaves to sugar.
That's right.
And so tease that out a bit.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, American history is strong. Okay, so one of the many reasons why Africans were brought to America was to work on those sugarcane crops, right? There was cotton, but then there was also sugar. So we became slaves for sugar, okay? And it is because of the sweet tooth for people in Europe and all these refined places that people were dragged from their homes, bound into slavery, and for generations to come, they were enslaved. That's obviously a fact. But here we are today. We've all got this sweet tooth. And one may say the black population has a slightly higher propensity for a sweet tooth, and there may be reasons for that. So now we are actually addicted to this substance, this white substance, not so much the heroin or the crack cocaine, but some may say the more difficult habit to kick, which is sugar. And in fact, we know that sugar stimulates those very same pathways that are in the brain for heroin as it does just for your sweet tooth. So we're now addicted to this white stuff. This white stuff is the thing that brought us to this part of the world. And now it's binding us in this very unhealthy, and I would say quite toxic, a prison of ill health. Because it is at the heart of a lot of the things that are going on. When you think about cancer, obviously cancer feeds so much on sugar, I think 12 times as much as the normal cell. When you think about obviously diabetes, obesity, it piles up the number of sins that sugar produces. So yeah, that's what I'm really talking about. Slaves for sugar in the past, slaves to sugar today.
I'd say it like this. So we are, sugar is twice our master. Sugar is twice our master. And one of the reasons African Americans, let me speak for us here in the States, my parents are from Jamaica, and it's a little different in Jamaica, but here in the States for sure, and most of the world, sugar is actually one of the ways that people self-medicate. When you have we talk a lot about stress, and when you're very stressed, you have consistently high cortisol levels. You stay in a state of fight or flight. When you eat sugary foods, especially sugary fatty foods, which is really the way that these foods are often packaged for us, a donut, a honey bun. I've been in England. I'm not a big fan of British food. They tried to give me some kind of blood pudding one morning. I told them I was vegetarian at the hotel.
Black pudding. Oh my!
The lady told me, "Oh, this is vegetarian." I said, "Is it real blood?" She was like, "Yes." I said, "Ma'am, I don't eat meat. You think I'm gonna eat blood?" But sugar, and when you mix the sugar and the fat like that, and a lot of the sweets that in England you eat with tea, you eat with a tea, it actually blunts the release of cortisol. It gives you a momentary pause on the feeling of stress. So and I have cousins in Manchester. I go to Manchester a lot, and then Von Thorpe down in London is a good friend of mine. I go visit him, and I can see that the stressors of Black America are different, like you said, in England and in the United Kingdom, but they exist.
Yes,
there is a struggle to get ahead and stay ahead. That is kind of just part of the background of life. Whereas here, it's very much in the foreground. And so when you're in that situation of being highly stressed, when race and racism is really tagging you, these foods actually seem to feel better, taste better, and probably are much more easily we become addicted to them. Of course, which is bad because when you eat these sugars, they literally go into your white blood cells, block the ability for vitamin C to get in, and render your white blood cells impotent for several hours. And so a lot of times in the winter and flu season, I could tell which patients eat the most sugar because of how many times we see them during the winter for cough, cold, flu type symptoms. And I don't think that's any different with COVID because sugar is also pro-inflammatory, right? So your vitamin D levels are low, but your sugar levels are high.
Yeah, no,
it's a double whammy when you start to build one thing on top of the other.
No, that's very good. And, you know, we have these lovely phrases for this sort of food. We call it comfort food, okay, soul food. I mean, all these lovely ways that we package it, but it's really sticking the knife in, right? I mean, comfort food. Yeah, you're right, because when we're stressed, and isn't it interesting? When we are stressed, we don't reach for the celery. We don't reach for the apple. When we're stressed, we need a big fix now. You know, they did this experiment with a load of rats, and they found that if you give rats as much sugar as they want to eat, they'll just eat as much as they need and they'll stop. You give the rats as much fat as they want to eat, they'll eat as much as they want and then they'll stop. If you give them a combination of that sugar and fat, they cannot stop eating.
Wow.
They die from morbid obesity.
Mercy.
And isn't that the combination of all the good stuff, of all the comfort eating, of all the biscuits, the ice cream, the chocolate, the cakes, 50-50 sugar and fat. It's the perfect drug for us.
And then they throw in the salt.
Yeah.
So, you know, so you take like French fries or chips and stuff, you throw in the salt and now you got a triple whammy. The salt itself makes you want to come back as well. And this is why we call this show. This is one of the reasons the title of our project is Slave Food, because it's just your concept of sugar parallels our concept of slave food. In other words, as slaves, food was used to manipulate and control us, starting in the slave castles of the western coast of Africa, all the way through the Middle Passage, on the plantations of the Caribbean, Central South America, and the United States. All the way through, food was used. And today, ironically, it is food that is used to manipulate us, control us, and extract great profits from us, just like food was used to extract great profits from us during slavery.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and the additional challenge with all of this is the accessibility, the advertisement and accessibility. I mean, if you wanted to have some sort of vice years ago, you had to actually go out and make it, right? In terms of the food, you had to make it and spend time in the kitchen crafting it. It took time and energy. And we speak of Doug Lyles, or psychologists, we look at the pleasure trap and so forth about the ease and trying to minimize the strain and the pain. And what ends up happening now is the cost is low.
Yeah.
We know it's accessible. It's at every turn it's available to you, whether or not it's this food or whether or not it's other vices that are around. And I think that's one of the tragedies, especially as it's centered inside these communities of color predominantly, or areas of poverty that are there. It's an overabundance of it in these food insecure areas.
Yeah, and I think that is a massive point. It's the accessibility of these drugs, right? And the ease with which you can do it. And by the way, you don't even need to get out of your car for most of the things in America, right? You can just take a few steps to your car, sit down, go to your whatever, pick it up and go. But you've not really expended any energy to get there. And you get this stuff and it is so accessible. And the thing that, in the early days, when I used to visit America, in the early days, the things that used to frustrate me were the adverts. I mean, in Britain, yes, we have advertisements, but they're not quite so frequent. So I just want to watch this program. Why is there so many adverts? Nowadays, the adverts fascinate me more than the programs. I mean, I'm more interested in watching the adverts, whether it's drug adverts, which then have a long list of side effects.
Yes,
I watched one. They had a long list of side effects, and in the middle of those side effects was death. That was one of the side effects. I mean, it's just, you know, if you take this, I mean, what is it you're taking a drug for that you're prepared to risk death for? I didn't quite understand that. But the other ones are the food adverts, because Americans know how to put food together to make your mouth water, right? I was watching one day, there was something about a pizza. So the first thing I saw, that they had cheese going through the crust of the pizza. I came back the next year.
Courtesy of the U.S. government.
Right. I came the next year. They didn't just have the cheese going through there. The whole crust was covered in bacon as well. And so it seems to me that anything you want. I was in a restaurant the other day, and you had a burger that was topped with Nutella, right? It's
wow.
anything is possible in America, right?
Yes.
We're just not quite as advanced in Europe yet, but Americans just know how to put everything, all the good stuff, if you like, together. And it can be, I mean, when you think about it seriously, if you have an issue with food or addiction or sugar, I wonder how I would be if I was born and raised in America, because the amount of temptation you have is way beyond what we have out here.
You know, what's so interesting is that, obviously there's a lot of consternation regarding the COVID vaccination, especially in communities of color and amongst many individuals. And so I remember kind of chatting with different folks, healthcare professionals and laypersons, and they start to kind of convey well, I just don't know about the ingredients and what it's going to do to me and some of the ill effects. And I said, well, tell me about the last time you read the label on the back of your food. Tell me about the last time you drove through the drive-through line and you saw the warning that was there that the food eaten here, purchased here, could lead to birth defects, that the food purchased here could lead to cancer, could lead to heart disease and diabetes. Tell me about your degree of consternation there, because I'm expecting to see consistency in it. And obviously they pause and they stop and they say, I get you, doc. I know where you're coming from. But, I think that's one of the things is that we're so trusting when it comes to certain things. We're trusting when it comes to food. And I always joke with patients. I say, I know there's several things I shouldn't talk about. I shouldn't talk about religion, politics, your mother, and your food. Those are the things you don't talk about, but we have to have these conversations. Yeah. These are tough conversations to have.
And let me jump in, Dr. Chidi. I love hearing your perspective of the U.S. Because when I go to Europe, I think one of the things that I am impressed with is people walk more, and people do seem to eat a more rounded diet in general. Even though the fast food places are there and so forth, they do seem to do that. The difference in the States is that the government is a co-conspirator with many of these corporations. The reason you see cheese in the crust of a pizza is literally has to do with the government's subsidizing and even setting up a corporation to help push cheese onto the public. And we have an interesting slide in one of our talks where we show you this is what the American government says you're supposed to eat. This is what the American government takes our tax dollars and subsidizes. And then on the next slide, it says what the foods that the government subsidizes are foods that cause all of these diseases. So literally the government is funding disease. And part of the reason the UK, Canada, France are going to look at this differently is the government is responsible for the individual's healthcare. So the government does not want people sick. So you're going to be like, hey, okay, enough is enough. We've gone far enough on this sugar thing or on these artificial sweeteners I remember being in England one time with my cousins and there was this big debate about genetically modified foods and the British people were up in arms. And I'm like, back in America, nobody's even thinking about this. I know. So it's we have that issue where the government literally subsidizes a lot of this because our government is not responsible for our healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, this is something we scratch our heads about here in Great Britain when we see that healthcare is not a right for everybody. I was at Johns Hopkins many years ago, and I remember the good Ben Carson. I was working under Ben Carson, and almost every lunchtime I would be criticized on behalf of all the British people because they would laugh at the healthcare system in Great Britain. And they say, well, you guys have to wait so long to see a doctor and, you can't get to the top post until somebody dies. I said, okay, fine. But nobody goes bankrupt when they get cancer. Nobody in Britain goes bankrupt because they have cancer. And by the way, can you imagine how difficult that would be? You have a diagnosis of cancer and now you're worrying about how you're going to pay the bills for it. Nobody even thinks about that in Great Britain. Everybody's paid their taxes. It is done. It is free. But I say this, even still, it's still for me. I've been doing this lifestyle stuff for about 20 plus years. It is still a bit of a push to get people to understand that, okay, we spend about 125 billion pounds every year on healthcare. We could lower that if we could introduce these kind of lifestyle changes, we could reverse these diseases, we could prevent these diseases. It is still a push. Yes. And there's not so much of the commerce behind it. There is just a traditional understanding of this is how we do medicine. And in fact, there is an industry of medicine that is built up for us to do the bypasses and to be in hospital for a certain amount of time. If we got rid of that, what would we do? I mean, in the early days when I was reversing diabetes, I went to the Diabetic Society. They didn't want to know. And they didn't want to know because you get rid of diabetes, what's the point of them? You know, that everybody's got their own vested interests. So we have to keep pushing beyond that.
Yes. It's still the mindset of the cigarette industry. Yeah. The concept is, well, they aren't going to do it. They can't do it. They're not. We somehow minimize the level of intelligence and commitment for patients. And so we refrain from extending to them vital care. And that's really problematic. And I think when you look at from an American healthcare perspective, one of the biggest ills overall is we may sit from a pompous standpoint and say, oh, well, we have this technology. Oh, we can get you in here and you can see the finest of the finest, but our outcomes don't suggest that we're offering the finest care. Our outcomes, when we compare ourselves to other Western countries, is abysmal. Yeah. That our longevity is abysmal, that our burden of sickness is abysmal. And so it's interesting in the contradictory type fashion in terms of our perception versus reality. And I think there is a movement that's growing, albeit slow, in terms of understanding the importance of this, and it's led by yourself out of England and Europe and bringing some of the information over here to the States, and many here in the States who are kind of driving this forward. It's becoming mainstream now at this point, which is good.
Let me jump in and say this, Dr. Chidi, you're an inspiration. I like listening to you, man. I love a lot of the work that you've done. And I want to say this to you about the U.S. The truth of America is that sometimes you can't see from the outside. I'm sure you can see it. You're a man of discernment. There's more than one America. The real issue with America, when I go to England, the first time I went to England as a kid, I'd grown up in a country where you could only date a black girl. Like there was no concept of dating. I went to England and white girls, Indian girls, everybody was trying to talk to you, and I was like, wait a minute, this is abnormal. And I use that only to say, every time I go back, I see, like you're saying, there's far more acceptance and inclusion among the races over there. In America, it's still quite segregated. Yeah. And what I mean by that is you come to America and we think of health from the perspective of everyone as a cohort, one big cohort. But the reality is if you pull away wealthy white Americans, they actually do quite well, probably better than most European countries for their health and longevity. If you pull away wealthy Asians, you probably find the same thing. Once you start going to another America, let's look at the Navajo Indians right now. Some of our indigenous people to this continent, they are suffering horribly from COVID, health disparities and things, and it doesn't even make the news. Yeah. They're dying disproportionately, and it doesn't even make the news. There are nations inside of America that are hidden. One of them, of course, are the Indian, quote-unquote, Indian nations. Columbus misnamed them. But also African Americans. There are pockets of us who live with completely different outcomes than other aspects of our country. So when you come to America, people can laugh at you and say, your healthcare system is like this, because the people you're talking to, they're not going to go bankrupt if they get cancer. The people you're talking to are going to get the best technology in the world every single time. And they're not. And here's the thing, when people say you wait a long time in Canada or England, you have to wait a long time at a county health department in the United States, to a county hospital here. Long line,
say that.
Conditions, worse than anything you would probably see overseas. So, I throw that at you because it's like, you've seen it. I mean, if you were at Johns Hopkins, you saw it yourself. There's more than one America. And I think that's what a lot of people don't see.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And it leads somewhere probably even worse, if you ask me. What's going on, and I think it's typified in America, but because there is this segregation that is still going on, you would imagine, because we're all human beings, you would imagine, okay, so if I'm doing okay, if I'm doing well and I get all my healthcare, perhaps I should be interested in people who aren't doing so well. Okay. But the issue is that we, spend so little time mixing with each other, we don't know what's going on. Yeah, I'm sure you'll find wealthy white people who are getting all this wonderful healthcare and everything. If you said what you've just said to us, they'd say, well, I didn't even know that was going on. And they don't know because there is no interaction. You said in England, yeah, we're kind of different. I remember hearing about the Second World War when the American GIs came over to Great Britain. This is in the 1930s and 1940s. Well, obviously, the black American GIs coming over to England were in a segregated unit. But when they came to Britain, well, they wouldn't put up with that. They said, there's no segregation here. So if you're going to fight with us, you're going to fight with all of us. There's no segregation. And that was back then. So Britain, you know, I know in Britain, you'll hear us complain about everything. That's what we're good at. We complain about the weather. We complain about absolutely everything. But we are decades ahead of pretty much any Western country when it comes to integration of races, right? And we're not perfect. We're nowhere near perfect, but we're way ahead. And I spend a lot of my time trying to say to people, look, you know what? Yes, things are not as good as they could be, but you know what? You tell me another place, even in Europe, where you'd rather be as a black man. I can't think of one, honestly.
Wow, that's deep. When I was in London, one of the things they told me was that they have the most interracial couples are in London than anywhere in the world.
By far.
I thought that was profound.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. All right. So we've got some questions for the panel. One question is, are you all dressed in black on purpose? And is the slave food color black? And is this your uniform? We need to know. I'm not wearing black, so I didn't get the memo, but please let me know. If on Fridays we should all be in black for this conversation going forward.
Well, I think these good doctors probably know what I know is that you know, if you're in black, your skin color looks a little bit healthier rather than if I was in white, I would look a lot. That's it. It's just a trick. It's just a trick.
That's right.
All right.
Aesthetics.
Exactly.
We definitely did not plan it.
I got it. Great minds think alike. Maybe that's what it is. Okay.
We'll go with that.
So I know we talked a lot about vitamin D early on, and some people joined the conversation a little late. The question is, what dose of vitamin D does the panel recommend?
Okay.
I do think it's worthwhile to get your vitamin D level checked. Having mine checked over years, it swings drastically. I mean, if I stop taking supplement, for whatever reason, it can drop pretty low. So it's interesting. It would be good to always know kind of a baseline. But the truth of the matter is, I don't know that we have a ceiling the way that we do it in the United States. And we would say the top level you'd want is like a blood level of 40 or 50. But like I said, in Africa, it's double that. People, when they check the blood levels of some of the indigenous tribes, the blood levels are higher. So I tell patients you should at least be taking 3,000 to 5,000 international units a day. Dr. Chidi said he takes 10,000. So I might have to up my dose there, brother. Thanks.
I like what you say there, and that testing is quite important because I recently saw some studies coming out of the NIH, National Institute of Health, where even if people were taking quite high doses, I mean, some of them were taking 20,000 a day, their blood levels weren't reaching a reasonable level. So for some of us, there may be some slowness in the rise of levels. So it's a good idea to have a check. Yeah, I've been taking 10,000 for well over 10 years. I take it every day, but I do recommend somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 a day. Most of the studies are around about that level.
Yeah, and one of the key things, so I agree completely with both of the gentlemen there. But one of the things that we know when we're looking at a lot of the normal levels, these averages, that oftentimes it didn't necessarily include individuals who look like us. It didn't include necessarily females. It didn't necessarily include different ethnic background individuals. It may be more the majority in terms of Caucasians, and so there may be some inherent slight differences based upon skin tone and other aspects there. So that's another level where the checking and knowing your levels is so critically important to have established a baseline.
Okay, and would you say that maybe as a result of being darker complexion, there's an issue with absorption or anything like that?
From the sun, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
From not from the oral
Not from a
tablet.
supplement.
Right.
Okay.
But again, what blows me away is Africans have high levels because
Okay.
they get great sun all day, every day.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, if you wear black, which you guys are wearing, and you wear it outside, you get a lot warmer than if you're wearing white, right? Like the white reflects the sun, whereas the black absorbs the sun.
Well, I shouldn't reveal this, but when the sun's out here, I take my top off. I'm out, I'm topless all the time, so I shouldn't say this.
The paparazzi gonna be coming out for you, Dr. Chidi.
You're a very conservative church out there, so.
All right.
In
Okay.
fact,
Moving right along. There we go.
Eric, when you're out in Connecticut, man, don't go Chidi style, okay?
Yeah, you go Chidi style out here. You go frostbite on your backbones.
All right. The next question is, what are the top 5 foods that you would recommend for those who are transitioning to a plant-based lifestyle? Okay. And so we'll start with you, Eric, and then just move around to Chidi next, and then Columbus, and see what that list looks like in the end.
I hope do I just give one, or do I give my top 5?
If you have 5, go with 5. I'm sure that there may be some repeats.
I'll just say ditto after that. That's right.
Yeah.
I would definitely say first and foremost, dark berries, dark blackberries, dark blueberries. Number one thing you could add to your food to instantly increase the nutritional density of your food. Number 2, leafy green vegetables would have to be my second big thing. And from being from Jamaica, I would say real good callaloo. If you can get your hands on some callaloo, you'll be doing real good. And from the South, some turnip greens. So, that would get you good. The third one I would say are cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, those types of things. I'd say a handful of nuts and seeds every day. And then the last one I would probably say are some very wet fruit. So like watermelon, cantaloupe, I would throw those on. There's a lot more, but those would be 5 of the things that I would recommend.
Thank you. Dr. Chidi?
Yeah, but of course, he's taken all the good ones, right?
Yeah.
I love the idea of dark greens and like Doc said earlier, we were talking about going outside and the sun actually releasing nitric oxide from your blood vessels, which is fantastic. But dark greens do the exact same thing. Dark greens are able to stimulate the interior of the artery so that they release nitric oxide too, able therefore to lower blood pressure naturally. So I mean that's a big deal for me. I'm a huge fan of berries. I mean, blackberries, strawberries, blueberries, they're just so full and packed with goodness. And especially people with children, often children are tempted to take all these candies and sweets and all that stuff. You get them hooked on blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, and they taste much better than the sweets they can get in the streets. No, they don't get sweets in the streets. I mean, you know what I mean, from the shops. but they're so packed with goodness as well.
Okay. All right, Dr. Batiste.
Yeah, it's hard to add anything to those. I mean, for me, I would definitely add in there, especially if we're planning on going Chidi style. We probably need to get in our beans or lentils to give us a little added protein when we're working out, so we can go shirtless outside. Otherwise, it might be a little bit kind of pirate-like, a little sunken chest, and so we have to make sure we get in the effective amounts of nutritious supplements there.
All right, fantastic. Next question, again on the lines of the top 5, but what are the top 5 actions that you feel are necessary to increase the probability of success toward adopting a healthy lifestyle?
Okay, all right.
We'll work our way backwards this time. Batiste, Chidi, and then Walsh.
Oh, okay. I was sitting there waiting for Dr. Chidi. So what's the question again?
You want to stop here? Okay. What are the top actions that you feel are necessary to increase the probability of success toward adopting a healthier lifestyle?
Absolutely. So I'm going to steal all of Eric's, because we always say the same thing with this. You're going to start outside the kitchen is number 1. Is what you're going to do. So first, I want you to get connected spiritually. And so irrespective of your belief system, a form of prayer meditation has been shown to be an effective keystone habit in strengthening your willpower in the prefrontal cortex that will allow you to move on. I think getting moving, right? So we're so afraid of exercise, but in terms of movement is so important. Neat non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just standing, moving, talking as you're moving around, has been shown to be a keystone habit and a foundational platform in order to build your habits. I think sleep is quintessential, right? So in terms of that regulation of the ghrelin and the leptin, in terms of counteracting this idea of getting the munchies late at night, is extremely important. I think hydration is important. Oftentimes we confuse hunger for dehydration. The fact that we have it and we supplement with caffeinated beverages, which causes us to lose free water, making us more inclined to issues that are there. And then is that 4 or 5? I think it's 4. And then those are really, then community, I think, is the other thing. I think attaching yourself, association brings on assimilation. So if I'm around fine doctors like Dr. Walsh and Dr. Chidi, that means I'm more inclined to do better because I'm seeing better. I know better, I see better, so I will therefore do better. And those are some of the key things outside the kitchen in order to kind of build your success.
Okay,
Fabulous.
Dr. Chidi?
Fabulous. I should have been taking notes there. Sorry. But I mean, I would add to that. I mean, I like it all. I would add to that. You know, when I really get to the heart of health, I like to think about this old-fashioned word, forgiveness, right? Forgiving oneself, forgiving others around you. Much of the stresses that we have in life come from a lack of forgiveness. And I mean that. I mean, we've done something wrong in the past. We can't forgive ourselves. Stress. Yes. I'm stressed, I eat. Yeah, I'm stressed, I don't sleep. I'm stressed, I can't be bothered to go and go for a run or go for a walk. So this root of stress, it permeates everything. I mean, all of the lifestyle diseases you can think of have stress somewhere in the heart of it. And so I you know, there's that wonderful text in the Bible, you know, guard your heart above all things, because out of it flow the issues of life. And I always say one part of that text is that many of the issues that are in our lives do not come from our neighbors, do not come from circumstances, they come from our own heart.
Absolutely.
They come from our response to what is going on. There is that space between stimulus and response. That's where we live. Okay. If we're angry all the time, if we're hot-tempered about everything, if we're always thinking about how we're hurt, right, we're gonna live stressful lives. And that stress drives your diet. That stress drives your ambition. That stress drives everything that you do. So forgiveness, I would add.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, Dr. Walsh.
All right, I'm gonna run off a few as quick as I can. Number one, accountability. If you find an accountability partner or partners, that is a very helpful thing. There's power in fellowship. Dr. Batiste always talks about oxytocin and how it is the antithetical hormone to cortisol. And one of the ways you can do that and be accountable to self, I love what Dr. Chidi just said. In fact, Dr. Chidi, flesh and blood did not reveal to you to say what you just said about forgiveness. That is a very powerful spiritual statement that was just made. And so one of the things you can do is journal. There have been studies that show that journaling is actually very powerful in changing your health. And again, it's outside of the kitchen. All of what I'm going to say is probably outside of the kitchen for the most part. Weekly weigh-ins, that's one of the things they say, you know, keeping track of things, your vitamin D, your cholesterol, knowing what your numbers are, having a plan. And Dr. Batiste and Dr. Chidi can help you with those plans, but having a plan is really important. And then the last thing I'll say is in the kitchen, and that is remodel your kitchen and the cupboards and the refrigerator. I think a lot of times we allow foods to stay in our kitchen that were designed by the enemy of our souls. And sometimes you gotta exorcise the demons from out of the kitchen. You know, I quote Dr. James Kyle all the time. I did when we were talking to Message Magazine the other day. Dr. Kyle said, your body will conspire to kill you. If you give yourself everything you ask for, your body will conspire to kill you. So you've got to get some of that stuff out of the way. Just like a heroin addict has to stay away from the corners and the houses, or the crackhead has to stay away. Once they're clean and sober, they got to just stay away from some food. There's some stuff you just have to stay away from.
That's great. That's great. Danette, I think it's important for Dr. Chidi. He was holding back. So I told you that I did a little survey of some of his talks. And I loved one thing that you said. Another thing that you said You mentioned something about sour and power and bitter being better and
Okay.
30-minute rule.
Oh
So
my
tell
goodness.
the folks about that. I think that's
Right.
important.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's good. And look, this comes out of the fact that, you know, sometimes we lecture people all the time, but sometimes people think that we've got it all sorted ourselves, which is not true. Yeah.
Not at all.
So I was raised with this sugar addiction, so I had to find practical ways that could help me overcome these addictions. So there are little practical.
Me too.
Exactly. So I came up with this, and it was it comes out of psychology, and you think to yourself, well, look, if you want a donut, and many of us want that donut, you know, Dunkin' Donuts have a weakness for them. Thankfully, we've only got 2 Dunkin' Donuts in the whole of this country. I'll be there all day.
There's one on every corner in Connecticut.
those are the corners you were talking about, not drugs, but
that's right.
Dunkin' Donuts. But when that donut is calling your name, the worst thing to do is just to say, well, I can't have the donut, because we're like children. When you tell yourself you don't want the donut, you'll want it even more. So the best thing to do is just to say, well, okay, I'll have the donut, but I'll have that donut in half an hour. Even I can wait half an hour. At the same time, you take something like an apple that's slightly sweet to the taste, but not so concentrated. But the sugar from that apple gets into your bloodstream, raises your blood sugar levels after half an hour. It gives you a lot more power to overcome the desire for the donut.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, you know, maybe once in a while you'll still take the donut after, that's fine, but you'll be taking it fewer times than if you hadn't done that. And so we call it the Dr. Chidi method, coincidentally, because it stands for don't resist, choose to have it, but delay it. Dr. Chidi. Don't resist, choose to have it, but delay it. I can guarantee, I mean, I get messages all over the time, all over the place. They say, this actually works. It's the first one that actually works for me. And the other one's quite similar, because it's down to our taste buds and what it does to our brains. So let's say you failed on the Dr. Chidi method. You're now going through your 5th donut. You're on your 5th donut. You may laugh, but I've done worse than that. This is a confession. You're on your 5th donut. If you want to find a way to stop yourself, bite something bitter. You know, take something like dark chocolate, bite something bitter. And that actually suppresses your desire for sweet things, biting something bitter. Or eating something sour like a Granny Smith apple will do exactly the same thing. And I often say to people, if you had to eat 4 apples quickly, would you choose a Granny Smith or a Golden Delicious? You'd eat a Golden Delicious because it's sweet and easy to get down. A Granny Smith, the sourness kind of stops you from overeating. So sour has power, bitter is better. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left. And so there are a couple of questions I'm not going to be able to get to, but one that I did want to ask is, why have you each made the decision to champion this message to the Black community? Dr. Chidi, I guess we'll start with you and work out.
Okay, because I mean, we hear a lot about health inequality, disparity, and there is. I mean, there was much more we could have talked about. I mean, there's serious disparities in health. What I love about this message, this kind of lifestyle message, is it has a level playing field. Everyone can experience it. You know, so long as you can get hold of basic raw materials, and I know that's not always easy, but so long as you can get hold of those basic materials, as long as you can start thinking about what you're thinking about, so long as my good doctors have said, so long as you can connect with people around you positively, this can impact your health in such a powerful way. In fact, a more powerful way than anything I can think of in medicine. So it's important that everybody gets to understand this. I love going out to places like Africa and teaching this sort of medicine, because often what they're trying to do is copy the medicine of the West, which is kind of a failed system.
Right.
What we want them to do is to just leap over that and come straight down to where we are today. This lifestyle medicine is cheap, it is effective, and it is a message of health, healing, and hope.
Fantastic. Dr. Walsh, we'll go to you next.
I'll be brief and just say, I think this is connected to social justice. It's connected to also the spirituality that many of us were raised on, understanding that a healthier lifestyle gives you a clearer mind. You can better connect to those things that are eternal. And one of the primary reasons to do this, our body is the temple of God and the Holy Spirit. You want that temple to be as clean and proper as possible. When you read the Old Testament and how the temple was taken care of, it tells you how specific we ought to be in taking care of our body temples.
Fantastic. And Dr. Batiste?
Yeah, just to echo what's been said already, it's really about the disparities and really about targeting individuals who are at the greatest need. And so when we look at all individuals can benefit from this message, when we look specifically at people of African descent, who tend to lead in nearly every category of disease and death and morbidity, they are the ones who can most benefit from this message and understanding in a practical, tangible way that they can overcome their burden, right? And so delivering that message in something that's palatable, and I believe this message should be delivered in a unique fashion to people of African descent, brown, Hispanic, Latino, to Asians. And so delivering it in something that will resonate with their culture and their heritage. And that's really what our burden is, our journey, and our progress part of the Slave Food Project.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Danette. Once again, it's been a pleasure, Dr. Chidi. I mean, listen,
We got to have you back on.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I hate that you're 6 hours ahead of 5 or 6 hours ahead of me. I have to speak for England in the morning, so I'm gonna have to get up super early.
Wow.
So just so you feel a little better, I'm gonna join you in this.
Thank you.
But we appreciate you coming on.
No, it's my pleasure. It's I'm appreciative of what you're doing, and I love this when people are trying to take innovation into what we do, and this really, and I'm hoping loads of people are starting to join in and listen to it. And I'm telling people about this in Europe and Great Britain because I appreciate really what you guys are trying to achieve. And I'm supporting you all the way.
Appreciate it. Well, we're looking forward to our future connection. And hopefully once everything settles down, it'll be really wonderful if we can all meet in person one day and hold one of these events here. To those of you who are out there tuning in, don't forget to follow Dr. Chidi. He's giving you some pearls out there, some great things. Check him out on his website. Check him out on social media as well. And stay tuned for us. Share this message. Like us on Facebook, on YouTube. Share it with someone that you know can really benefit from this. And we'll see you back here next week. Next week, we're looking to bring on a giant in the field of culinary history, right? Culinary historian. And so we're looking for Jessica B. Harris, and she'll walk us through this diaspora food to really kind of be a nice take home from this diaspora of disease that we spoke about today. So stay tuned. Look forward to seeing you all. Thanks for tuning in.
Goodbye.